Hello, my name's Christopher Mountford, and as promised, this is the follow-up video where I'm going to explain to you what philosophical counselling actually is. So I thought I'd start off by explaining what counselling is. The NHS defines counselling as a talking therapy where you speak to a trained therapist who will listen to you and help you deal with your emotional issues. That's counselling in a nutshell. Just someone who's going to listen to you. You could think of counselling generally as the art of communication and the art of listening, which I suppose is part of communication. I've done some rudimentary counselling training. Like I said in the previous video, I'm not a trained psychotherapist. I've only done an Introduction to Basic Counselling Skills course. So my counselling skills are somewhat regrettably not my strong suit, but obviously, like any counsellor, you want to work to improve your practice skills continuously as you progress. So you're probably thinking, well, how are you a philosophical counsellor before we get onto the philosophical part? Well, it happens to be the case that in the UK, counselling, therapy, and psychotherapy are unprotected terms, and that means that they're unregulated practices in the private sector. If you want to do it with the NHS, there's a particularly high grade boundary you have to reach. They've got their own requirements. But if you want to do it privately, like I do, you don't need to have any particular qualifications, though of course it is best to have as many as you can. You want to be as sure that you're being safe for your clients as you can possibly be, and you want to make sure that you're improving yourself and doing the best you can. So now onto the philosophical side of things, which is my strong suit, I promise. I've got an undergraduate degree in philosophy and a postgraduate master's degree in philosophy. I specialised in philosophical counselling for my master's dissertation, and I've continued to work on my research on philosophical counselling. I've met many other philosophical counsellors. I went to Romania for an international conference for philosophical practice called the ICPP, the International Conference for Philosophical Practitioners. And I've, done extensive research on philosophical counselling. And I knew when I heard about philosophical counselling that it's what I wanted to do. I heard about it in my third year of undergraduate study, and I decided that is something I want to do because it was a way to do what I love, which is philosophy, but it was also a way to help people. And I felt like that was something I wanted to do because studying philosophy was a lot of fun for me, but I always had a little bit of personal turmoil about the fact that, well, it's not useful, as people say. I mean, I disagree with that to an extent, but I wanted to feel like I had an impact, a personal impact, and I didn't know how to make these two worlds collide. My love of philosophy and my desire to have a practical, immediate impact on the world. And when I took a module called Philosophical Counselling in my third year, I pretty much by the first or second lecture, I was like, I want to do this. This is great. I want to do this. And just since then, I've been mad about it. I've really looked forward to it. And it's taken about a solid year to set up my practice, Get Philosophical. So yeah, that's a little bit about my backstory and my relationship to counselling. Now we can get onto the philosophical side of things. So philosophy is a difficult subject to define. It's somewhat embarrassing how often I'm flustered by the question of what is philosophy, because I get that question a lot when I tell people that I work in philosophy, that I study philosophy, etc. So there's a few different ways you can go about it. The way that I usually describe it is I tell people that it's a multidisciplinary subject and that the three core subjects are metaphysics, which is the study of the nature of reality, ethics, which is the study of how to live the good life or how to do the right thing, and epistemology, which is the study of truth and knowledge. Those are the three core aspects of philosophy, but there are, you can imagine it like a little bit of a tree and it trickles down with the roots. There are other subjects that are quite closely linked, but they get greater degrees of separation as things go on. So for example, religious studies often has a big overlap with philosophy, but it's not intrinsically philosophy. It is its own thing. The same for mathematics. There's a relationship there between, particularly in early philosophy, mathematics was a very strong, heavy part of studying wisdom, of studying philosophy. And there are lots of other little things, logic, for example, and logic will correlate to things like computer science and so on and so on. So philosophy has got its fingers in a lot of pies, you could say. Now, what does philosophy mean? Well, philosophy means the love of wisdom. That's what it translates to from Greek. More broadly speaking, philosophy is just the pursuit of knowledge, of intellect. That's philosophy in a nutshell. And I can perhaps do another video some other time on exactly what philosophy is, because there are a lot of other theories. Like I say, it's somewhat embarrassing how much there is about philosophy, about what philosophy is, to the point where there are numerous books simply titled, "What is Philosophy?" So difficult is this question that there is an entirely new discipline dedicated to figuring out what philosophy is. It's called meta-philosophy. But like I say, we'll get onto that maybe in a different video. If people like this, then absolutely I can make that video. So what is philosophical counselling? How do the two things merge? Well, philosophical counselling is a type of counselling for non-mental health related problems, or a non-clinical approach to counselling. Now, what does that mean? Well, mental health problems are usually clinical in nature. That is to say that a serious mental health problem, let's say, for example, something like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, they will have some link to the pathology of the body, meaning there'll be some link between a person's mental state and some physical process that's going on, like a hormonal imbalance or some structural issue within the brain, something of that nature. So those are the extreme mental health problems that are clinical in nature. And so those types of problems are best delegated to people who have a clinical approach to mental health, like a trained psychotherapist who works for the NHS. But arguably, there are certain mental health issues that are not necessarily clinical in nature. For example, if a person feels depressed because they've had a breakup or they've lost a loved one, or for some other reason, perhaps they lost their job or some other external thing, well, that's not necessarily a mental health problem, as in it's not a mental illness, because it's an appropriate response to losing a loved one or a job or a breakup, etc. And so that's more of a mental well-being issue, you could say. And so the distinction would be that sometimes you can have these ordinary or ubiquitous problems like feeling down or feeling anxious because you are going to be in a play, or you've got a big job interview or something like this, or you are questioning your identity, your place in the world, you're having an existential crisis, we call it. These problems are not clinical in nature. And so those are the types of problems that you can see a philosopher for, a philosophical counsellor, because they're ordinary problems. Everyone has these problems at some point. Everyone has a breakup. A lot of people change career. Lots of people question their identity or their place in the world. They struggle about what their career is going to be, etc. These are all perfectly ordinary problems, human problems, you could say, and they are philosophical in nature. And so because of that, those are problems suitable for philosophical counselling. But if a problem is of a nature that seems mental health related, it's clinical, like hearing voices in your head that are not your own, or having mood swings that you can't explain, things of that nature, feeling so depressed constantly that you're failing to look after yourself, like eat properly or do things you need to do, or you're neglecting your job or something like that, well, then it becomes what we call clinically significant. And that's when I, as a philosophical counsellor, would refer you away to more appropriate services, because I'm not qualified or educated to deal with those types of issues. And it's in the best interest of clients to see someone that is suited to those types of clinical problems so that you can get the best help. So I make absolutely no illusions about what I do. I have a document on my website. It's available for anyone to look at. It's called a grounds for referral document. And that is a quite detailed document that explains the kinds of things that I can help with as a philosophical counsellor and the kinds of things that I simply cannot help with. There are some fringe cases, some outliers where maybe we could come to an arrangement, but those are fringe cases and they have to be dealt with delicately and with consent from myself and the client. And of course, they're fringe cases, so they don't happen very often anyway. So that is pretty much philosophical counselling in a nutshell. The prevalence of philosophical counselling is that it's quite rare at the moment. And that's because as a practice, it's fairly new. There are organisations that certify philosophical counsellors, such as the APPA, the American Philosophical Practitioners Association, which is an international think tank. It's not just for Americans, but it's based in America. There's also the NPCA, the National Philosophical Counsellors Association. I am not part of a organization for philosophical counseling. I'm an independent practitioner. My practice, Get Philosophical, is independent. At the time of making this video, I'm the only person that works at Get Philosophical, but I would like, as my practice grows, to start employing other philosophical counselors. So occasionally, if you scroll through my website, you may see now and then I might flip-flop between using individual pronouns like I, and then other times I'm using we or they. But that's because I plan to grow the practice, you see. We can talk about some philosophical counseling techniques. Now, philosophical counseling is a lot more loose and fast than traditional psychotherapy, because in traditional psychotherapy, they'll have a kind of treatment plan because it's a clinical approach to mental health. So there will be certain procedures of how things are done. And you know, they can be fluid. It's obviously what's best for the client. Philosophical counseling doesn't have particular pedagogy, a particular way of doing things. So the way that philosophical counseling works, at least for Get Philosophical for myself, is that you have a free consultation that's 30 minutes long. And that's really to get to know each other and to get to understand what the issues are that you might be dealing with. And we have a discussion about expectations, about what you want from philosophical counseling. And I'll advise on whether or not I feel that it's something amicable to philosophical counseling, if it's something that I feel you will benefit from. And if not, I'll do my very best to refer you to services I think would be more appropriate, because of course I don't want to charge people and take clients if I don't feel I can really offer them anything. And especially if I don't think I can help in any way, because that's just no good for them. It's not in their best interest. And then we move on to sessions proper, one-to-one sessions. And in those one-to-one sessions, there's a lot of just listening. A lot of my job is just to listen to what is going on with you and to help you feel heard. This is what in counseling they call active listening. So I'll be there to listen and to understand and to really try to empathize with you and understand what's going on. And then depending on the nature of the problem and what exactly you're looking for from philosophical counseling will change how we approach future sessions. So for example, if you're feeling that you have a problem that you want to solve, we can start to engage with it intellectually, philosophically. We can start to have discussions where in a non-confrontational way, I can start to challenge some of your assumptions. For example, there's something called catastrophizing. And this is when we take something that's happening in our lives and then we extrapolate from that a set of things that we're convinced are going to happen. So for example, if someone says, oh, I was late to work the other day and the boss is already angry with me, so I'm probably going to lose my job. And if I lose my job, guess what? I'm going to lose my house because I'm not going to be able to afford my mortgage. If I lose my house, I'm going to end up homeless. And if I'm homeless, guess what? I won't be able to get all my medicine. I'll lose my friends. I'm going to die on the streets. Now, to some people, that seems like a perfectly reasonable set of assumptions to have. But actually, if we look at the first one, I was late to work, and then look at the last one, therefore I'm going to die alone on the streets, there's quite a big gap in between those two things. And it's because we've been catastrophizing, we've been making assumptions from this first thing and trickling down all the way to our final assumption. But this explanatory bridge is not very strong, it's quite weak. So that's something that I would challenge you on. I would say, well, is it the case really that being late to work means you'll die on the street? Is it possible that there could be some other outcome, et cetera, et cetera? So that's an example of how I might challenge some assumptions that a client has in a non-confrontational way. There's also similar techniques like that, such as Socratic questioning, and that's used quite commonly in cognitive behavioral therapy, and it originates from Socrates, arguably one of the most notorious philosophers ever. And that's basically because Socrates used to just ask questions. People would make assumptions or assertions, and he would question them on it. Someone says to him, well, Socrates is courageous, so you must know about courage. And he would say, well, what is courage? And they would say, well, it's being brave. And he's like, well, what's bravery? And they would go, well, bravery is when you do great things. And he might say, well, what's a great thing? And what Socrates is doing there, what Socratic questioning does, is it peels away all of the extra information, all of the assumptions that we make about what we're saying, till we can try and find the core, the most fundamental thing that we're trying to actually say. And then we can understand what we mean. And so Socrates was not very liked for the way he went about this, but there are nicer ways of doing it that aren't just why. What's that? Explain that to me. You can obviously, if someone is having some sort of emotional issue and saying, I don't feel good enough, well, we can start to peel that back. Well, when you say not good enough, what do you mean by that? What is good enough? Why are you not good enough? These kinds of questions. And over time, we can start to peel that back and figure out what is happening, why someone feels that way. What do they really mean when they say it? And for the client, that can be very helpful, because in our head alone, it's very hard to challenge our assumptions. And we're very good at having this kind of emotional reasoning where we have an emotion about ourselves or something that's going on, and we start to believe that we're being rational about it, but actually we're being emotional about it. And we don't realize it until someone starts asking questions and we have to suddenly answer them. And we go, well, I don't really know what I mean by that. Well, let's find out. Let's try and figure it out. And it's a slow process. This type of philosophical counseling, it's slow. It's not necessarily problem solving. I make no promises that I can fix your problem, that I can improve your perspective necessarily, but those are the things I try to do. I try to talk through a problem with someone, or I try to open their eyes to a new perspective, but I can't promise that, And this is an important distinction to make actually about philosophical counseling, what it is not. Philosophical counseling is not advisory. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that I'm not going to offer you advice. So if you say you're having problems with your partner, I'm thinking of breaking up with him, for example, I'm not going to tell you one way or the other that you should stay or leave, because that isn't my job. That would be advising you, and I do not do that. What I do is I can ask you, well, why are you thinking about breaking up with him? And you can talk to me about it, and we can start to unpack that so that you can have a clear mind. You can lay out your thoughts in front of yourself, and I can help you do that. And then you, the client, can figure out what you want to do. Do you want to break up with him, or do you want to stay? If you want to stay, how are you going to approach that? If you want to break up with him, how are you going to approach that? And that's what we talk about. But I am not an advisor. I'm not a life coach. The only kind of advisory practice that I partake in is I can offer philosophical ideas to you. So that might look like, well, someone comes in and says, well, I want to be more resilient. I feel like I'm not resilient enough. And I might say, oh, well, Stoic philosophy is one of resilience. So perhaps you might want to read this passage from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Now, that's me offering you the idea of Stoicism and offering you a passage from a book. This is called bibliotherapy, by the way, where I offer you books to read, and that gives you substantive information to come and talk to me about again. But that's as advisory as I will ever be to any client, because counseling as a general practice, including philosophical counseling, is not about advising. It's not about me fixing your problems. It's about me making you feel heard, listening to you, offering you philosophy that I feel may be beneficial for you. But ultimately, in the nicest way possible, your problems are your own and your concerns are your own. And I'm only here to listen, to hold your hand, to discuss solutions with you, but I'm not going to tell you which ones to pick. I'm not going to tell you how to change your life or that you need to change your life. But if you want to change your life and you've got some ideas about how you want to do it, that's something I can talk to you about. That's something we can discuss, because these types of things are philosophical in nature. They are intellectual issues. And philosophy, I've said this for a while now, philosophy is nothing else if not a tool for improving our thinking. And so I think I'll wrap up this video here by saying that philosophical counselling primarily, although it has many merits like improving perspective and self-reflection and offering philosophical ideas, offering us the ability to find new ways of coping with life's problems by looking back at how philosophers have done it in the past, all these things are great. But if nothing else, philosophical counselling is about improving our thinking. Because the hope is that if we can improve our thinking, then we can improve our lives. We can make better decisions. We can see more clearly. We can view more perspectives. We can better ourselves through philosophy. And that's really what I, as a philosophical counsellor, do. That's what I hope to achieve. So I hope you enjoyed me rambling. I hope it wasn't too long or boring, but I really appreciate you listening, and let me know your thoughts. If you have questions about philosophical counselling, feel free to comment or send me an email or visit my website at www.getphilosophical.com. You can book a free consultation with me there, and let me know what kinds of videos you'd like to see in the future. Would you like me to discuss what philosophy is, some meta-philosophy? Are there particular philosophical problems that you are interested in me talking about? Let me know. I'm all ears. Thank you very much for your time, and have a lovely day.